You may have heard of a book called They Both Die at the End, which blew up on Book Talk around 2020. It was a standalone young adult novel set in an alternate reality where a company known as Deathcast would call you on the day you were going to die. The novel has since become a New York Times bestseller, and despite being originally planned as a standalone, people were eager to hear more about the world of Deathcast, which of course eventually spawned the prequel, The First to Die at the End, and now finally, the sequel, The Survivor Wants to Die at the End. The Survivor Wants to Die at the End takes place 3 years after the events of the first book, and 10 years after the original launch of Deathcast. While readers were eager to hear more about this elusive company, the author, Adam Silvera, promised not only a big reveal, but a complete shift away from the previous 2 books. From the timeline to the fate of the characters, it really felt like Adam Silvera was trying to shake things up. But it didn't stop at the format. From the marketing of this book to its title, it was clear that Adam Silvera had something he wanted to say in this book. Specifically, he wanted to talk about mental health in a way that he hadn't done in the previous books. And it seems like the very thing he was trying to do, i.e. bringing light to mental health issues, is exactly what's dividing readers. From the graphic scenes to the depictions of certain mental health diagnoses, readers can't decide if this is a brutally honest depiction or going too far. So without further ado, hello, welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today I will be analyzing everything in The Survivor Wants to Die at the End. First, I do have to give some disclaimers. First and foremost, this will be a spoiler-filled review. If you haven't picked up the book, if you don't know about the series, and you want to find out before getting into this video, I suggest you click off now. I also want to give a major trigger warning, not only for the contents of this video, but for the contents of the book. At the beginning of this book, there is a trigger warning in the author's note, specifically for suicidal ideation and graphic depictions of self-harm, but I need you to really truly understand that it is extremely graphic. Some of the graphic depictions of self-harm include self-mutilation with sharp objects. The other less overt forms of self-harm include destructive behaviors, promiscuity, unhealthy relationships with food and body image, and smoking. And there are also references to 2 mental health diagnoses, including borderline personality disorder and psychosis. I'm giving these more specific trigger warnings because me as a person, I value transparency. I understand to a certain degree that by me giving these specific details, I'm spoiling the book, but to me, protecting readers is infinitely more important. So on that note, from this point forward, I will be censoring myself, and that is not necessarily for the purpose of the algorithm, but mainly because with the frequency I will be saying these words, it will get overwhelming. And personally, I find it slightly more bearable when you don't have to spell out these words over and over again. And that's not just to protect you as the viewer, but also myself. I don't know how often I can really say these words without really having it affect me. So yeah, I will have to be censoring myself. So if you have a unique problem with that, I'm sorry, but that's what I'm going to be doing. So to wrap up, if you are sensitive to any of the topics I mentioned, please click off the video. You do not have to watch it. Protect yourself, do whatever you need to do. Even if you are not extremely sensitive to these topics, I highly recommend that you take breaks while watching this video as well as reading the book. And just be very mindful of how you're feeling and, do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. So with all of that out of the way, let's go into a brief summary of what this book is about. The Survivor Wants to Die at the End follows our 2 main characters, Buzz and Alano. We are first introduced to them in the prequel when they're children after the launch of Deathcast. Alano is the heir to the Deathcast empire, and in this book, he is getting ready to take over the mantle. Buzz used to be a child actor, but he has since fallen from grace after he murdered his father on the very first end day. Which, if you haven't read the prequel, on the very first end day, there was an incident where 12 people who were signed up for Deathcast did not receive their alerts. Buzz's dad was one of those people, and the ensuing murder trial was heavily publicized because of Deathcast's involvement. Now, Buzz was 9 years old when this happened, and despite being found not guilty by the court of law, he was blacklisted from all of Hollywood. It was nearly impossible for him to secure work after this incident, and people around him really just treated him as if he was a cold-blooded murderer. And now, at the age of 19, having suffered 10 years of relentless torment from the public, Baz has had enough. When we find him at the beginning of this book, he is incredibly unwell. His mental health is deteriorating, he's seeking help from a therapist, but he still struggles with SI. As we are ramping up to the 10th anniversary of Deathcast, Baz decides that he's gonna give life one more shot. He auditions for a role in a movie adaptation of one of his favorite books, Golden Heart. And despite crushing the audition and everyone liking him for the role, once they find out his true identity, they think it's too much of a risk and don't cast him. It's this moment that sends Baz into a spiral where he decides that he is going to climb the Hollywood sign and finally prove Deathcast wrong. Now, on the other side of the country in New York, Alano is struggling with his title as heir to Deathcast. There is a growing sentiment of people that are trying to steer away from Deathcast and live pro-naturally. That being, going back to the lives they lived before Deathcast existed. Among these pro-naturalists is a terror group known as the Death Guard. These people are specifically targeting the Rosa family and even put a hit out on Alano. After Alano is attacked outside of his apartment in New York City, his family decides to move him to their other house in LA. Alano feels suffocated, trapped not only in his own home, but under the weight of responsibility from his father. So on the very same night that Baz goes to the Hollywood sign, Alano also sneaks out. They eventually meet on top of the sign and Alano is able to convince Baz to come down. For the rest of the story, we slowly start to see Baz and Alano's relationship grow. Alano is determined to keep Baz alive and show him that there is a life worth living. We see Baz as he struggles with his own diagnosis and tries to be someone that is worthy of Alano. The story follows the trials and tribulations of their relationship, as well as the ups and downs of mental health. We have a presidential election going on in the background that could determine the fate of Deathcast, the rise in Death Guarders as they continue to attack the Rosa family, and it all leads up to the 10th anniversary of Deathcast. So that's the most spoiler-free summary I could have given for this book, but now I'm going to go into my analysis. Now in this section of the video, I'll be going over the depictions of mental health, borderline personality disorder and psychosis, codependency, and overall examining the dynamic between Baz and Alano. But first, let's talk about the depictions and specifically how the author is trusting the reader to understand this book. Now, as I analyze a book that is uniquely about mental health, you might be asking yourself, Kristen, what makes you qualified to talk about this topic? Well, a few things. First, I have been a reviewer for over a year now, and I've talked about this series multiple times on my YouTube channel as well as on TikTok. And what makes me a great reviewer is that I actually have a degree in creative writing, so I'm familiar with the writing process, certain decisions that authors make, and craft elements. And surprise, surprise, I actually do have a lot of experience with mental health. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety when I was 13 and actually received dialectical behavioral therapy, which is what Baz receives in the book. I also used to struggle with SI and SH, and I've gone through a lot of the same experiences that these characters do. And the last thing that makes me qualified to talk about this book is that I actually went to an author signing event with Adam Silvera specifically as he's promoting this book. I was fortunate enough to hear him talk about his writing process, the certain choices he made, and I even got to ask him a question that helped inform my review. Trust me guys, I have been sitting on the script for this video for over a week because I literally just needed to take that time to fully gather my thoughts so that I could make this as coherent as possible. So the first thing I want to talk about right now is this concept of trusting the reader. Now, if you read YA or any novels that are aimed at teenagers, you will know that there's this reoccurring issue where authors don't necessarily trust their audience. Anytime there is a complex or otherwise nuanced conversation happening in a book aimed at teens, authors oftentimes feel this need to over-explain and hold your hand so that you know exactly what you should be thinking and feeling. As he was talking about the book, Adam Silvera specifically said that he wanted to trust his readers, implying that he wrote it in such a way where he was not going to hold your hand and explain everything you should be thinking and feeling. Coming to your own conclusions is extremely important if you're going to understand the overall book and its characters. And one of the things that he didn't come out right and say specifically is how mental health can warp your perception of reality. At the beginning of the book, you see Baz go through setback after setback, and every reaction he has to these setbacks isn't always equal. The day after Baz's attempt on the Hollywood sign, he notices that Alano is not texting him back fast enough, and his immediate reaction is to go back to the Hollywood sign to finish what he started. He spirals completely and believes that Alano abandoned him. Now, someone might read that and immediately think, Baz's reaction was completely disproportionate for what happened. He's acting irrationally. This is just showing how codependent he is on Alano. Which, yes, you're not wrong for thinking that. But where some readers are going wrong is thinking that Adam Silvera's portrayal of this scene is meant to justify Baz's thinking. The author has already told us that Baz is struggling with borderline personality disorder, which means he has extreme highs and extreme lows. This scene is not meant to make you side with Baz. You're not supposed to justify his actions. It's meant to show how BPD is affecting his thinking. But again, Adam Silvera isn't just coming out and telling you that. He is trusting that you will be able to pick up on the context and understand what it is he's trying to say. So if you're going to read this book, you really need to have a critical eye. You need to be taking a step back to look at the whole picture. And I think what will really make or break your read of this book is understanding that Baz and Alano are unreliable narrators, which I really hate saying because I feel like anytime there's an unlikable character in a book, people are quick to just label them as unreliable and that somehow justifies them being a shitty person. But hear me out. These two characters, Baz and Alano, are both experiencing mental health issues. They both exhibit self-destructive behavior and show how their perceptions of reality are warped as a result of their illnesses. You as the reader are not supposed to trust their portrayal of events because they themselves are not perceiving them objectively. Now, that's not to say that they're lying maliciously, but there is a clear difference in how they think before and after receiving coping skills. Towards the end of the book, you see Baz actively changing his thought process. He'll have an immediate reaction to something, but then he reminds himself to take a step back. He'll ask questions or clarify in order to prevent a spiral. Overall, these are incredibly complex characters, and instead of just telling you that you shouldn't justify everything they do, he lets you come to that conclusion on your own. But that's not to say that the journey there isn't also extremely uncomfortable. I feel like anytime that there's a character that is exhibiting these mental health struggles, our immediate reaction is to kind of be on their side, at the very least to show sympathy. So when you see Baz and Alano exhibit unhealthy behaviors in their relationship, it causes some kind of cognitive dissonance. It's like you want to give them grace because they are struggling, but what they're doing is objectively wrong. And if they didn't have mental health issues, you would be quick to point out that what they're doing is borderline toxic. But you understand how their illness is affecting them and why they're doing these certain things, but you still can't justify it. So you're kind of fighting yourself and then at the same time thinking, wait, is the author trying to portray this because he agrees with what they're doing? Or is he trying to show that what they're doing is wrong? And at first it can be extremely conflicting until towards the end of the book you start to see them seek treatment, which leads into my discussion of their diagnoses, that being borderline personality disorder and psychosis. First and foremost, I have to say that I am not a mental health professional. Even though I have my own struggles with mental health, I cannot say anything on the topic of BPD or psychosis. So I'm not going to go into whether or not I think they actually match the symptoms of their illnesses or how valid the portrayal is, because no amount of Google searches in the world could make me confident enough to talk about something like that. What I can say is that the author, Adam Silvera, has been very transparent about his own diagnosis of BPD. So I imagine that to some degree, his own experiences have informed his portrayal of Baz. And if Baz's actions and his personality and just him in general is informed by someone's actual experiences with BPD, then I don't think it's anyone's place to say whether or not it's valid. This is where our critical thinking comes into play, and we understand that one person's portrayal of a mental illness is not a monolith for the illness as a whole, that one person's experience can be widely different from another, but that doesn't make either of those experiences invalid. So that's all I'm going to say on that topic. But the thing I do want to speak on is the specific choices for these portrayals, that being the naming of the diagnosis, the SH, and the SI. During the event I attended, Adam Silvera talked very openly about his goals for the book, that being to destigmatize mental illness and kind of implicitly give you therapy when you read it. Even in a world where I feel like we talk about mental health all the time, it's still really important to take away stigma, especially from an illness like this. I took an AP psychology class when I was in high school, and the one thing I remember learning about borderline personality disorder had to do with a movie. My teacher actually had a whole bunch of movie posters all around his classroom, and he had labeled each one with a mental illness. So there's this one movie, Obsessed, with Beyonce, if you might remember. I think Idris Elba's in that movie too. I could be wrong. Why am I not remembering the dude? And the villain in that movie, the blonde-haired lady that's trying to steal Beyonce's husband, my teacher had diagnosed her with BPD. There's also a movie that I watched with Bella Thorne. I think it's You Get Me. I could be wrong, but that would also be kind of a very dramatic portrayal of BPD. So I think when you have media like that, despite the fact that none of these people are actually diagnosed with that disorder, they still show a lot of the same behaviors and symptoms of the illness. And of course, by putting it in the backdrop of a horror/thriller movie, it makes the illness seem scary. And it implicitly puts this stigma so that real people that actually suffer from the illness are immediately connected to these exaggerated portrayals in movie and television. So when you have a character like Bus, where you're already put in a position where you feel sympathetic towards him, you are inside his mind, you can understand how he's getting from point A to point B, it helps to destigmatize the illness. So in this case, I think Adam Silvera did an amazing job at destigmatizing the illness, not only by naming it, but by making a sympathetic character like Bas. My concern, and honestly, this is really just my plea to the adults that have teenagers or young adults in their lives that want to read this book, please make sure you understand what it's actually about. I fear that the graphic depictions in this book can, in the wrong hands, give someone ideas. Specifically with giving ideas to someone who is already struggling with mental health on how to SH without anyone noticing. Let me tell you a little story. When I was institutionalized for SI, my therapist gave me a book about some other person that was also struggling with SI. The narrator of this book talked about walking around looking for buildings that were a certain number of stories, because if it was below that number and you tried to walk off, you would only injure yourself. So to someone who was actively undergoing treatment, this was not an inspiring story of someone choosing to live. This was advice. Once I was released, I started subconsciously counting the number of stories of buildings around me to see if they were high enough. And guys, this wasn't just like a throwaway line in the book. The exact number of stories needed was the title. So my concern with this book is that Bas is explicitly describing how he is hiding his SH from his parents. Now, reading this as an adult who is stable enough that this wouldn't cause a relapse, I was fine. So this is my plea to other adults. This is where, yes, it is your responsibility to know what your child is reading. If someone you know is actively struggling with SI or SH, this book might not be for them. As the responsible adult in this situation, it is up to you to make these decisions for your children, to decide what it is they can and cannot handle when it comes to this complex and extremely heavy subject material. It is absolutely not the responsibility of the author to censor themselves at the risk of giving people ideas. This is where we as readers have to be responsible and read the trigger warnings at the start of the book. So other than that concern, I still do have a problem with the SH in this book, and that's just because I am of the mindset that there is really no need for graphic depictions of SH. This is really truly a personal preference. This is just my own personal opinion, and the only argument I have to support this claim is that I feel like even if you're showing it to try and bring awareness, I think most people are only interested in these kinds of scenes for the shock of it all. I think the reason Adam Silvera chose to include these scenes is because more often than not, people think of depression and SH as common and therefore disregard its severity. People don't fully understand how debilitating it is to have these urges to harm yourself. Humans have a natural instinct of self-preservation. We are programmed to keep ourselves alive and avoid getting hurt. So when someone is committing SH, they are actively ignoring their human instinct to protect themselves. So by having these scenes of Bas hurting himself, the author is showing that it's not just all in your head. It's not as simple as, oh, you need to go out in the sun more and get some fresh air, then you'll feel better. You literally see Bas say how much he wants to stop and how much physical pain he's in, but he literally cannot. This is why mental illness requires medical intervention, whether it be therapy or receiving some kind of medication, because it is a lot more serious than people make it out to be. But will everyone get that from these scenes? No. I think despite the gore, there was an effort to depict how truly horrifying it is to have these urges. Not only to want to, but feel like you have to, even when your body is screaming at you to stop. It's definitely scary, but I do want to say that this scene is notably different than the iconic, for lack of a better term, 13 Reasons Why scene. I truly wholeheartedly believe that that scene was only meant to appeal to people's morbid curiosity, to take something as delicate and horrifying as SH and turn it into a spectacle. And that's my fear with a lot of graphic depictions of SH in general. Even if you do it with the best of intentions, I think most people only pay attention because of the spectacle. So yeah, I understand why it was included and I can rationalize it, but it wasn't my cup of tea. I just think there are other ways to show how destructive mental illnesses can be and really convey the severity without depicting scenes like that. Which then leads into my next point concerning Alano's psychosis and their collective codependency. This topic of codependency is something that I saw cited in a lot of people's 1 to 2 star reviews. And what I'm going to say about it actually ties back to my original point, being that Bas and Alano are unreliable narrators. As I was going through people's reviews, I saw a lot of people bringing up the fact that Alano didn't exhibit any behaviors that would indicate he was going to have a psychotic break. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, Adam Silvera himself is showing us the very different forms that destructive behavior can take. For Bas, the destructive behavior is SH, it's smoking, it's the negative self-talk, it's the violent thoughts. But for Alano, it's almost something that you would normally perceive as positive. Throughout the book, Alano wholeheartedly believes that it is his responsibility to save Bas from himself. Alano was the one that talked him down from the Hollywood sign. He even agreed to give him a personal end-day call, if you know what I mean, with his own hands. Alano is the one that reads about Bas's diagnosis, teaching him more about the signs and symptoms, and he even goes as far as to implement dialectical behavioral therapy with him. In Bas's eyes, this is just how Alano is showing how much he cares for him, but really, this is just an example of destructive behavior. You are not supposed to think that it's healthy for Alano to take it upon himself to save Bas. That's a huge weight to carry on your shoulders, even if you aren't going through your own mental health struggles. Their relationship is extremely codependent, where you hear Bas frequently say that he is only living for Alano, that he cannot live without him, implying that if Alano were to ever leave him, he would find himself back on top of the Hollywood sign. So to all the people that are shouting that this is unhealthy and codependent, you are right. During the signing event, I had the opportunity to ask Adam Silvera one question, which was, do you think Bas and Alano's relationship is healthy. Now, it wasn't an ideal circumstance because he was signing my books, there was a line, it was a lot of chaos, but he said something along the lines of, I think they're two boys just trying to figure things out. He acknowledged that some of the things they do together are unhealthy and even said that he took out certain scenes because they were too cruel. Now, he was being a little vague, and I think part of it is because as the author, he was allowing me to come to my own conclusions. But I think another big reason is that this conversation is more than likely going to be developed in the next book. But what he didn't say still said a lot about their relationship. I think we're supposed to understand that the dynamic between Paz and Alano is not the same relationship that we see with Mateo and Rufus or Orion and Valentino. The insta-love between Paz and Alano is not a result of getting a call from Deathcast. Their insta-love is a result of codependency and unhealthy coping skills. Now, when I was initially reading this book, I did jump to the same conclusion. I thought that their relationship was supposed to be portrayed positively like the other relationships in the past two books. Honestly, I was listening to the audiobook and it felt like I was about to watch two cars crash into each other. Anyone who has ever been institutionalized will tell you that the cardinal rule, what they tell you when you're there, is under no circumstances should you make relationships with the other inpatients, and especially not romantic ones. Why? Because of the risk of codependency. Because even if you are in a stable place, but your partner is not, it's easy to get sucked into their highs and lows. So even if you are getting better, if you are on the path of recovery, if your partner relapses, you are more likely to have a relapse of your own. And let's just say, this is something I learned the hard way. So I'm listening to this audiobook literally like covering my eyes because I cannot bear to see this happen. I kept saying to myself like, oh my God, this is so incredibly toxic. Alano, please, Paz needs help that you cannot provide. Please call someone. Which again, that response is the correct response. However, what makes this incredibly complex is that the book isn't saying that Paz and Alano can't ever have a romantic relationship or that they shouldn't. I think it's easy to say that their dynamic can be a little toxic and that Alano is way in over his head trying to keep Paz alive. It's easy to say that it would be better for both of them if they just weren't together. But there is a nuanced conversation to be had here because oftentimes it is when people are struggling that they need love the most. But what I think we're supposed to understand as the reader is that sometimes love is about making hard decisions and saying, you need help that I can't provide. Alano and Paz keeping their attempts secret is not love. Alano trying to be Paz's therapist is not love. Paz relying on Alano to be his reason to live is not love. Overall, these are incredibly complex concepts, and even to someone who has experienced a lot of the same things, this book really challenged me. I think Adam Silvera really forces you to consider your split-second reactions and take a step back and break down what it is you think and why. Because a lot of the conversation here is challenging your preconceived notions of mental health, which even someone like me, who is a strong advocate for therapy and someone who talks very openly about their struggles, I really had to confront my own biases. Because guys, the path to healing is not just one and done. Oftentimes you still have to confront the things from your past. And what I found myself realizing is that I kind of have a lot of resentment towards my younger self. I have a lot of regret for the decisions I made when I was a kid and when I was struggling. So when I see these characters making the same mistakes, I felt angry, but it was just me projecting my own anger that I had towards myself. And then I had to go back and think, why am I angry? It was incredibly eye-opening because I realized that I wasn't extending grace to Paz and Alano because I wasn't extending grace to myself. It's easy to look back at the things I was doing in hindsight and say, oh my God, that was so ridiculous. I can't believe I did all of those things. So I had unintentionally been carrying a lot of shame and guilt for my own struggles. And this book really forced me to kind of grapple with that and think, why? Why is mental health, why is struggling so shameful? And just thinking about where I got that perception, who taught me that I should feel guilty about the way that I was acting. So needless to say, I did some growth while reading this book, and it was extremely hard for me to get through, even though it's been 10 years. Actually, it's been over 10 years since I was really in deep with my own struggles. So this book was definitely a challenge for me, which is, again, also why I give the trigger warning and why I'm more explicit about it, because I thought I was in a good place. I've read other books that talk about these topics and I didn't have the same issues. But then I was like, ooh, that actually struck a chord. Let me take a break. But enough of my self-discovery. Let me get back to the book at hand. I think there's a big reason why it didn't land with readers, and that's because we are only getting half the story. Originally, this book, book 3, was supposed to be called No One Knows Who Dies at the End. It was still following Paz and Alano, but it was a completely different story. Adam Silvera mentioned that his main goal with this book was to accurately depict the highs and lows of mental illness. The biggest barrier to depicting this was that he couldn't fit it in the 24-hour time frame of the previous 2 books. So he extended it to a week, but as he was writing it, he realized that the book was extremely long. And so it was split into 2. But this split caused a few issues. First, with the plot. I think the whole arc with Deathcast just didn't move nearly as fast as the other 2 books. There is a semi-reveal, and I say semi because it's like a reveal, but you don't really fully understand what it is that you just learned, and it happens on the very last page of the book, so it ends on a cliffhanger that people were definitely not happy about. Because I mean, the audiobook is, I think, 16 hours, it's a 700-page book, so imagine you go through all that only to end on a cliffhanger. A lot of people just didn't feel the payoff when it came to the development of the plot. I think in general that by the time you get to the end of the book, there's still a lot of things that are up in the air. You don't know what's going to happen with the election, what is in store for the future of Deathcast, what are the Death Guard going to do to Alano's family. And the other big thing that's still left up in the air is Paz and Alano's relationship. I think we are starting to see the beginnings of their arc as they hopefully create a healthier relationship with each other. But as of right now, they're both incredibly codependent. Neither of them have received professional help, and overall, they still have a lot to overcome. I think this book is a good setup for book 4. We have a lot of conflicts that are already set up for us, and we kind of know where the book is going to go. But overall, I think this book was meant to serve a very specific purpose. Adam had something he wanted to say about mental health, and he wasn't going to spoon feed his message to us. But as of right now, it's not quite complete. I think the book is incredibly fleshed out and it does have a lot of depth, but there is still more to say. I think this book does require a few rereads if you're really going to grasp what's going on, but the real test will be once book 4 comes out. I agree that I was a little underwhelmed with the development of the plot, but again, I think the purpose of this book was really to talk about mental health, was to talk about the relationship dynamic between Paz and Alano. So it's really hard for me to give my review because I do feel like the story hasn't been completely told. We're only getting one piece of the puzzle, so I could really only give my proper review once the last book comes out. I think that's where we're going to get all these loose ends tied up, where everything is going to have its full and satisfying arc. And that's not to say that I view this book negatively or that I think it's incomplete. I just think that there is still more to be said. This book was definitely a risk. It broke the mold of the previous 2, and it was definitely experimental. So I think tentatively I would give this book a 4. And again, I really don't want to give a rating because the story is not incomplete, but there is still more that I want to hear from these characters. Out of the series, I wouldn't say that this book was my favorite, but I really respect what Adam was trying to do here. Again, I will come back to this once book 4 comes out. I am on the edge of my seat already, and I can't wait to hear what comes next for Paz and Alano. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you're all okay after this. I definitely want to reread this book, but I think I'm going to space it out a little bit. Again, it's just extremely heavy for me. And even though I do like the writing and I do love Adam Silvera's work, for me and my mental health, I gotta take a break. This book has been on my mind literally since release day. And if you follow me on Goodreads, you'll see that one of my updates, I was like 3% of the way through the book, and I was like, never mind, I'm going to take a break. This is a little too intense for me. So yeah, I did want to make this video because I'm worried that there are a lot of misconceptions about it and people aren't fully grasping it, which is par for the course when you're allowing the reader to come to their own conclusions and you're not, again, over explaining what you're trying to say. So I just wanted to make this video to provide a little bit of nuance to those who are interested, because there is a lot of complexity to this book and I could honestly talk about it for hours. And when I went to that signing event, I was actually so excited because I thought everyone had read it already and I thought we were gonna like essentially have a book club. That's not what book signing events are. I just need to find other people that have read this book so we can talk about it. So if you have any thoughts about this book, if you've read the series, anything you want to say, please leave it down in the comments below. I've literally been itching to talk about this book with people because when you're going over something as complex as this, sometimes you really just need to talk it out. And writing the script, recording this video has really helped collect my thoughts on it and what I really think about it. So I think it's extremely helpful when you can kind of bounce ideas off someone. And I can kind of bounce ideas off you guys, except right now it's very one-sided as I'm recording it. So of course, I love to have conversations in the comments. So leave your thoughts below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and you should also follow me on all my social medias. I record a lot of my first reactions as I'm reading books and I upload it to my TikTok, Instagram, and all that good stuff. Adam Silvera actually commented on one of my videos. Yeah, so if you want to see that video, you should follow me on my social medias at Listen to Kristen on TikTok, Instagram, and BlueSky. And of course, Goodreads. I do update there occasionally. I will also be providing some resources in the description below if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, whether it be depression, SI, SH, BPD. Please feel free to check out those resources and of course, take care of yourself. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.